Come join me as we paint this cute little cabin in the snow. This is a painting that I did last year and thought it would be fun to create it into a tutorial. So we're going to be redoing it today. I did this line drawing that you can download. You can trace it or you can just use it as a reference. These trees here look dark, but they're just kind of sketched in, and when you draw them, just put them in very lightly because we just need them as a reference. These are the supplies that we're using. We're using some Moonglow, Indigo, Prussian Blue, Payne's Gray, Olive Green, Burnt Sienna, and a little white gouache at the end. I used a variety of different round brushes, but you just use what's comfortable for you. We start off by wetting our sky, kind of going across those trees. We're going to do a wet on wet technique, and we just need that whole area wet. I'm starting off with my indigo. I realized when I put my first drop in there, it's pretty dark, but I decided that we're not going to really be copying my previous painting. So I'm going to go with that deeper sky. It's going to be a little moodier, and I'm kind of enjoying that deeper indigo. So we're just going to create our sky with those dark colors. We're going to have it dark at the top, and it's going to slowly get paler as we get into those trees. And then I'm going to take a tissue and I'm just going to tap out real lightly a few little places to make some clouds, just kind of soften a few areas. Want it a little more dark in the corner. Just going to bring in some olive green, and we're just going to put our first layer of trees in. It really is more of a backdrop here. We don't want any detail. It's just our first layer of color. And it's okay that it's bleeding up into the blue. We want it to be really soft. Kind of like those trees in the background are kind of frosty. Maybe it's a little foggy. And so we just want the slightest amount of color on this first layer. And we're going to be building that color as we go, as we do each layer. In watercolor, it's rarely one layer and we're done. We kind of build our layers and our colors as we go to create our interest and our depth and our color. Just taking a little burnt sienna. It's just going to blend in there really softly and give it a little more dimension. I let that first layer dry, and now I'm going to come in with another watery layer of that olive green, just putting a little more detail in those trees, but we still want it to be kind of vague. We don't want a lot of detail. It's just kind of putting in that thumbprint of the tree. We really want our cabin to be the focal point, so these trees are really a backdrop. And as I go, I'm kind of changing the color of the green, so not every tree is exactly the same. So I just put in a little bit of my indigo with my olive green to make kind of a cooler green. And the trees that are maybe a little bit bigger or a little closer can be a little darker. I think I'm using about a number 4 brush here, and I'm just going between that warmer and cooler green to keep that variation. As we start working on these trees on this side of the paper, they're kind of moving away from us. So as we work down the page, they get lighter and lighter, less and less detail. So it's just kind of a hint of tree here. The things that are closest to us are darker, and as they move farther away from us, they become lighter. While it's still wet, I'm just placing in a little deeper color. The paper dried just slightly, but it's still wet, so it just kind of allows us to add a little more color without adding detail. Just adding a tad more color to some of these bigger trees, but just a little bit. Now we're going to start working on our cabin. Just laying down a little water so we can just have a soft first layer. Using some of our burnt sienna, just kind of dropping it in there and just letting it kind of spread softly. We'll build the color and the texture as we go. I'm going to put in my first layer of shadow while it's still wet, using my Moonglow. Just kind of putting it under the eaves, and it's okay that it's kind of blending in with that burnt sienna. Now we're going to mix a little Payne's Gray and Moonglow to create the dark color that we need for our windows. I'm going to take a little bit of my indigo, making some of my shadows on the eaves a little bit darker. And then I'm going to take a little bit of that color and kind of put it into my cabin. My paint is still wet here, so it just kind of spreads a little bit, kind of gives it that aged look. If your cabin is already dry, you could spritz it with a little water or mix some watery indigo and add it in there. Now we're going to add a little water to the stonework because we still want to continue our wet on wet techniques. And I added a little too much water there, so I'm just taking a tissue and just kind of tapping out the excess. Just taking a little bit of that Moonglow and Payne's Gray mixture. Just kind of putting it in there lightly with my small #1 brush. I don't need the paint to fill that whole area. I'm just kind of scattering it around, and we'll slowly build that stone texture. Now I'm just adding in the same mixture, but just a little bit darker. My first layer of stonework is still a little wet, so it kind of spreads in there a little bit more, but it still gives that variation of what we have underneath and what we're putting on top. Our little chimney there isn't going to have any detail in it, so we're just putting in a little bit of color and keeping it simple. And now we get to move on to the snow. I switched to my number 10 brush and I'm just laying in some clean water because we want our first little bit of snow to just be really soft. We'll kind of build our color and our shadow as we go. To me, it always feels pretty harsh when you're adding in that first layer of color on the snow. To me, it always feels so dark. So I just kind of like to build it slowly, kind of get a feel for what I want to do. I'm using some of that Moonglow and a little bit of that Payne's Gray mixture, and then I'm just placing in some water, kind of softening those edges. If you don't have Moonglow, you can do just about any mixture you want for the snow. You could use some of that Payne's Gray with a little bit of blue, or add some violet or purple in there. But it's kind of fun to make that snowy mixture have a little bit of color in it, that it isn't just Payne's Gray or just blue, but just kind of has a little gradation of other colors. It gives it interest. So just kind of play around with the shadows that you would like. Kind of softening the edge there where the trees hit the snow so it doesn't look quite so harsh. I'm just taking the smallest amount of my Prussian Blue and Moonglow to make another little blue mixture. I'm just putting it in there just in a few places just to give a little variation. I'm just going to build up another watery layer of shadow in our snow. Just kind of deciding where the shadow is coming from. In this painting, you can't really tell, is it nighttime? Is it daytime? Is it moonlight? And so where is that light coming from? So I've kind of decided the light is coming from the right. So all our shadows are going to be the deepest going to the left. Now we're just going to continue to work on our cabin, kind of building the color and the detail. We're going to be keeping our details pretty simple, but we're just going to kind of keep building what we've started. You really can make this painting your own by you deciding where you want to put the detail or where you want to keep it more simplistic. I really love aged wood, and I love building layers and then letting it dry and building another layer to kind of create that kind of aged weathered wood look. And so I really enjoy this process where each time I come back in here to the cabin, I'm just adding a little bit more of those colors and giving that cabin a little personality. So you can really decide for yourself where you're going with this one. Do you want your cabin to be more vibrant and less detail and more blocked in color? Or do you want to use this smaller brush like I'm using and just add in just little bits of detail here and there? They're just very soft detail. It's like you're giving your eye something to look at. Your brain is kind of filling in those gaps and that detail. You just go as simplistic as you want or as detailed as you want. This really is just a fun little painting just to practice and try new things and maybe just experiment on things that you haven't done before. I noticed here that my trees kind of melted a little into the top of my roof there, so I just took a little clean water and my little paper towel and just kind of dabbed out that green, and it lifted really nicely. Now we finally get to work on these trees in the foreground. Just kind of did a darker brown mixture, and I'm just using my #1 brush to start with, and just kind of putting those branches in as organically as I can. I can't really see the branches that I had drawn there before, but really that's okay because those were just kind of like a placeholder that I knew that the tree was going to be in that location, but I really don't need to follow specific lines. Almost kind of zigzagging my strokes a little bit, kind of wiggling my brush so that those branches aren't just a straight line. I'm kind of leaving little gaps there, and we're going to be adding more branches later that have snow on them, so we're just going to leave it like it is. And now we're just going to work on that second tree, doing the same technique. I could use a smaller brush. I'm using a #1 here. A smaller brush would kind of give me smaller branches, but I just can't seem to get quite enough paint on the brush to do what I want to do, so I'm still using my #1. I'm not pressing down too hard. I just want that little wiggly branch line, and kind of adding in some more little bushes that are just little branches. We're just kind of giving that little wintry look where all the leaves are gone and just have little bushes and twigs that kind of stick out of the ground. Adding in just a little more shadow. As we built that color up on the cabin and on those trees, it just kind of looked like I needed to add a little more shadow. Now I'm using one of my smallest brushes to kind of add in a little more detail in that rock. This one is my 18/0 Princeton Select Short Liner brush. It just gives me a lot of control to kind of draw with that paint. I'm just kind of adding in a little detail in just a few areas. I don't want to outline every rock. We're just giving that hint that the rock is there. The stones that are closest to us, I add a little more detail, and as it kind of moves away, I do less detail. Now, if you feel your shadow is already dark enough, then don't worry about doing this part, but I'm just going to add in a little more shadow in a few places using Very Watery Moonglow, kind of making this side of the cabin a little more shadowed. And under those trees, giving that snow a little more depth and dimension. Just taking a little bit of water, softening those shadows a little bit. Now we're going to take a little bit of our white gouache. We're going to be adding in that detail on our windows. I'm using that really short liner brush that I talked about earlier, and just put a little bit of that white paint on there. And we really don't have to be perfect here. It almost would look odd if it was too perfect, so I'm just kind of mapping out here where I think my little lines should go. Some places I'm just barely dragging that brush across the paper because I want it to be pretty faint. It's amazing how just adding that little bit of detail in the window just changed the whole appearance of that cabin. It's almost like the eyes of the cabin. It gives it its personality. And now we're going to continue with that white gouache with our small brush there. And I'm just going to do that same technique that I did with the brown, and I'm just going to drag that brush across, kind of wiggling it around, making our branches imperfect, kind of more wild and natural. Just kind of give a little bit of that there's that snow on those branches. It really does make these trees pop. This is the part of the painting where I really feel like it's coming together. The personality of the painting's popping out, and it really is kind of those little final touches there that really make the painting in the end. I mean, all those layers we put in and all the other work we put in obviously is very important, but this is kind of like the lipstick, the lipstick on the painting, just kind of making little parts sparkle a little bit. I really had fun with that part of the painting. And then we just kind of continue that on our other tree. I love these parts where it feels like I'm drawing, and it just, I don't know how to explain it, but it just kind of brings me joy to do this part of the painting. We're just going to add a little more of the twigs and kind of wintry grasses. Now I'm just mixing up a little bit of my olive green and burnt sienna just to give a little variation in there, just to keep it interesting, so that all those little twigs and grasses aren't all the same color. It's a very subtle choice, but I think it really helps in the end. And I'm just picking a few little places to stick that white gouache to kind of make that snow sparkle. My paper really is more of a natural white, so it's not a bright white. So I just think it's kind of fun just to add a little bit of that gouache in there and just kind of create a few little highlights here and there, like the moon or the sun is kind of reflecting on that snow just a little bit. And there you have it, your rustic cabin in the snow. I hope you like this tutorial, that you learned something new, that you want to try something new, and you want to give it a try. Happy painting, and I hope to see you on the next tutorial.